Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me on the screen, as always, my co-host, Joe Clark. And Joe and I will be headed down to Indianapolis here in just a few short days. Really snuck up on us here. We were just talking about, you finish up with the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, and then before you know it, you're in Indianapolis for a week. Talking to how many prospects this year? 320 or something like that. Just unreal,
a whole lot,
an unreal amount.
There are still some snubs.
Yeah, exactly. There's always manages to be some snubs, despite basically seemingly the entire draft class being invited. Yeah, so all that to say, we're not going to have an episode next week, but we will have plenty to talk about the following week. Usually, we get a pretty good idea we already kind of know the Steelers are probably interested in defensive line just based on what we saw at the All-Star games, but we'll have a much better idea of specifically who after the combine, as well as, maybe there's some other positions like safety that might be a sneaky position that the Steelers speak to a lot of prospects. We're going to have all that kinds of information for you guys, not next week, but the week after that, on Tuesday, as always. Our topics today that we're going to dive into is a report from, or not really a report, but more just kind of Mark Kaboly talking about the Steelers avoiding the middle of the field and kind of how that's attributed to Mike Tomlin and his philosophies and what that means for the offense overall. Then we're going to talk about Najee Harris in the running back room just a little bit and finish that up with a report about Fields maybe being interested in going to the New York Jets. So we're going to dive into all of that and more. We'll have a listener question at the end of the show. If you want to be heard with your question on a future episode, numbers at the bottom of the screen there. If you're audio only, it's 412-254-3145. Again, 412-254-3145. You can call and leave a voicemail, or you can text, and we are happy to answer your question. Joe, how are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. Are you guys getting any of this? We're about to get, I guess, 3 or 4 inches of snow, which is, not much for Pittsburgh folk or northern folk, but down here in the South, it's notable.
Yeah, we got 4 to 5, I think, this weekend, and then it all froze over on Sunday night, so it's been an icy mess around here. But I think at this point everything's pretty much shoveled out and settled. But yeah, we got a few inches this weekend. It was Saturday night, it was quite blustery.
You guys have the infrastructure to handle it with salt trucks and the plows. Not so much down here. There's like 2 plows for our whole county, and it just doesn't work out so well. But I guess that's the blessing of working from home. But we're going to dive into our first topic here. And this one coming from, like I said, the Pat McAfee show's Mark Kaboly, their Steelers correspondent. Here's the quote that he said on, was this on 93.7?
Yeah, it was on 93.7 last night.
Yeah, the 93.7 evening show. Mike Tomlin's been very transparent with that. When you throw the ball across the middle, a lot of bad things can happen. He said that before. I don't know if he's said that publicly, but now it's public. He said that before. So, that tells you the mindset right there. He wants to stay away from turnovers, and he believes the majority of the turnovers do come from the middle of the field throwing the ball. Joe, this post seems to be making some waves on our website. People have strong reactions, which I could have probably guessed. Anything Tomlin/conservative approach related, people get, we'll say, a little upset. Do you have any kind of just reactions to this? Is this a surprise? Is this, I guess just what is your reaction to that?
Just given what we've seen out of this team the last few years, it's not particularly surprising. While Mike Tomlin might not have said publicly that that's why he doesn't throw over the middle of the field, he's publicly talked about winning the turnover battle and how important winning the turnover battle is a success. And if he really does think that throwing the ball over the middle of the field leads to more turnovers, which it can, it makes some level of sense, but I don't agree with it. I still think you can't, kind of neglect the middle of the field the way the Steelers have over the last few years. It still has to be a part of your passing attack, because then teams can just take away the flats and the corners. And we saw teams switch to play a lot more zone in the second half of the season after Russell Wilson's deep ball was working, and then the deep ball all of a sudden wasn't working as well. So teams can adapt and take it away, and then you're often just stagnant. So like a turnover sucks, but a 3 and out 6 times a game also sucks and doesn't do you any good either. So you have to find a way to balance it. And I hope the Steelers do, and that this isn't just like a full Tomlin philosophy. Don't throw over the middle of the field at all. Like I mean, they do it. Obviously, they do throw over the middle of the field. They have to do it more often. I mean, all the best teams in football are able to attack over the middle. And it also speaks like, do you really have that little faith in your quarterback that you're that worried about turnovers, whoever the quarterback is? So I don't like it, but it doesn't necessarily surprise me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to when was the last time the Steelers were throwing over the middle of the field. Is this like is this a chicken or the egg kind of situation in terms of like who have they had at quarterback? Well, Russell Wilson, he's short, you can't really see over the middle of the field as well. Kenny Pickett, did they really ever fully trust him? Justin Fields, we know they never really fully trusted him, just given what they said during that Atlanta Falcons game in Week 1 last year. And specifically, I think if we're pointing to a specific time of what Kaboly's probably talking about, it's probably that from Week 1 last year, where they talked about specifically avoiding the middle of the field to get away from Jesse Bates, that safety in Atlanta, and the impact that he can make on a game. And so, Ben Roethlisberger obviously did throw over the middle of the field throughout his career, but when did that stop? I mean, his final season, they weren't really using the middle of the field. Maybe his final couple seasons. It's difficult to really like. Is this like a was this a? It spanned multiple offensive coordinators now, so it's either they haven't had the quarterback that they trust enough to do it, or it's just like Mike Tomlin's philosophy has shifted to the point where he just believes it's best to not in general. Which I guess we won't really find the answer to that out until they get a quarterback that's capable. But yeah, I just found this interesting, and I think there's been some conflicting reports or conflicting messages, I guess, from other Steelers insiders. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Ray Fittipaldo said that Arthur Smith has more autonomy over the offense than most people think, and Tomlin's more wrapped up in the defensive side of the ball. But when Tomlin makes a hire, you'd think he probably makes the hire based on what aligns with his philosophy. So, did they throw over the middle of the field less or more than Arthur Smith with, say the Titans when he was the offensive coordinator there, or the Falcons? I don't have those numbers directly in front of me. I would guess it's a little bit lower. But all that to say, the conservative approach hasn't really been doing this offense very many favors. They've obviously been in the bottom of the league for years now. Is there, I mean, the Eagles, I guess you could say that their approach is somewhat conservative this year. I mean, they ran the ball a whole lot. So I keep going back to that Super Bowl performance and just watching the Eagles dominate. And is that something that's going to embolden Tomlin's philosophy of basically, okay, we can play that way. We just need to have the better personnel. We need to basically just execute better. Do you think he's thinking along those lines? Like, obviously this is just a total guess, but
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, Art Rooney said the same thing in his postseason press conference hours before we saw the Eagles go and win the Super Bowl. That it was, running the football can still be an effective way, an effective approach to win games, but you really need the personnel to make it happen. And the Steelers haven't had the personnel that to work. I mean, as much as they've invested on the offensive line, there's still been struggles in the offensive line. The run game hasn't, strung together a strong full season. I mean, there's been flashes this year. Najee Harris started the season well. In past seasons, he's finished the season well. This year, everything kind of faltered down the stretch. So they haven't done it. I mean, the Eagles and some of these other teams just do it all season long, and they just run the ball down your throats, and they can ground and pound. And I mean, it helps having a mobile quarterback there too. But the Steelers just haven't done it all season long. So I'm sure they might think that way, but they just don't have the pieces in place to do it. And I'm sure this offseason they'll walk and figure out. And if they have Justin Fields, that will help them establish their run game and play a little bit more conservatively because they'll be able to run the football a little bit more. But I don't know how long you can go with that thinking and that they can still win this way when the results have not lived up to it. You haven't won a playoff game since 2016. I mean, at some point you have to adapt. Like you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and over and expect it to work. But that's kind of what it feels like they've been doing these past few seasons, and it's just frustrating. I mean, I'm sure with this, we'll see what happens if with Najee Harris. We'll get to that later, but the run game has to improve one way or another. And obviously, I don't feel like the coaching is a problem because Pat Meyer's still involved. He's the de facto run game coordinator and the offensive line coach. So if it's the players and they bring Najee Harris back, then I don't know, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of at a loss for what they if they want to do and they're thinking they can do, um, given their struggles over the past few seasons.
Yeah, that's probably a good segue into our second topic here about Najee Harris and just the running back room in general. I agree. If they do bring Najee Harris back, then what is the personnel change? Because you've invested, you're not going to make any big changes on the offensive line right now, I don't think. Um, you just I guess you just place all your hope in the fact that okay, this offensive line is going to be better. It needs to be better, and they're just kind of placing all their hope in that it will be better. I think it's not an unreasonable thing to do, but it is. We haven't seen it necessarily. We've seen flashes. I think Broderick Jones played better in the second half of the year than the first half. Obviously, he was horrendous the first half of last year. But Troy Fautanu, is he going to come back and be the player that they seem to be excited about throughout the preseason process last year? Is Mason McCormick going to be better now that he has a full year of, or basically a full year of NFL experience under his belt coming from the FCS? I think that's reasonable to assume. All these assumptions are reasonable, but if you bring back Najee Harris, like you're really kind of putting the full onus on that offensive line improving because you're not gonna. Your receivers aren't going to make a huge difference in the running game. I mean, if your pass game's a little more dynamic, yeah, there'll be a little more room to run and all of that. But this is all kind of aside from the point. I got on a tangent there. Najee Harris, do we think he's going to be back? This kind of stems from a report from Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette saying that he has a better chance than not of returning. Now, some of his own PG colleagues are less sold on that. I think Batco says no, and Fittipaldo's maybe on the fence about that idea. Dulac, I guess, maintaining that he's better chance than not of returning. So, Joe, can you see a world in which that is going to happen?
I can, because after they declined his fifth year option last year, Dulac was also harping on the idea that they could go. They'd probably work out an extension with him. Then his tune changed again in the beginning of this offseason. He said that Najee's probably not returning. And then recently that seemed to change. And if he's reporting it, it's probably coming from inside the organization. So who knows where that maybe Najee wants to take a team friendly deal and stay. But if the Steelers extend him and they're paying him more than they would have paid if they accepted his fifth year option last year, when the whole purpose was they want to see how he looks in Arthur Smith's offense, and the way he looked at Arthur Smith's offense was pretty much exactly the same as he looked at Matt Canada's offense. The numbers were, pretty strikingly similar in terms of, yards per carry average, total yards, all that. So, I mean, it just, again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go, now you're going to pay him probably more money than they would have had they just picked up that option and then keep him around and stick with the same run game. Especially, when you look at this running back draft class, there's like 30 plus draftable running backs. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of depth. You have Jalen Warren, you can bring back as a restricted free agent and pair him with a rookie running back. I just don't. After the way the season ended, the run game faltered on the stretch. I don't really understand keeping the status quo here. Like, I like Najee Harris. I think wherever he goes, he's going to have success. Probably a little bit more success than he had in Pittsburgh. But I just don't think he's the best fit right now for the Steelers and what they should be looking to do, because otherwise you're just keeping the offense, pretty much the same. And like you said, you're putting the onus entirely on pretty much the same offensive line to take a step forward, which, yeah, like they certainly can, but just how much of a step forward are they going to take if you're going to be this ground and pound team that really wants to run the football, and that's how you're going to play, and you're just rolling with the same personnel that hasn't necessarily worked the last few years. So I think I think a world does exist where they do say, yeah, hey, we'll bring you back and sign you to whatever deal and see what happens. I just don't personally think that would be the best path forward for them.
Yeah, I think you look at last year's free agent crop at running back, and a lot of these guys went to other teams and all of a sudden, played a lot better. I mean, Saquon Barkley is the most obvious example. He went from, I think, like 900 some yards to over 2,000 rushing. He was injured a little bit in 2023, but still over doubled his production. And I was looking at, because with the Giants, he obviously didn't have the best situation over there. Eagles, he has arguably the best situation, probably the best situation for a running back. And so you just look at what Barkley was doing with the Giants, and I just found this interesting. Najee Harris had 1.9 yards before contact per attempt this past year, and that is the exact number that Barkley had in 2023 with the Giants, 1.9 yards before contact per attempt. With the Eagles, that doubled to 3.8 yards before contact per attempt, which is basically Najee Harris's yards per attempt. I think he was 3.9 this year. So Barkley had all kinds of room to run, and it paid off. Now, Barkley's able to make the most of it because he has, kind of another gear in terms of explosive and like speed that Harris has. But I just found it interesting. Like, are the Steelers going to be the next kind of, Packers with Aaron Jones, or Giants with Saquon Barkley, or who else moved?
Derrick Henry.
Yeah, Derrick Henry, obviously.
Tony Pollard.
Yeah, a lot of these guys went elsewhere and had success. And are the Steelers setting themselves up for that kind of disappointment? Are we going to look back on the season next year and be like, oh my gosh, like, why, what how could they have let this happen?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that a change of scenery is probably going to be better for Harris if he gets behind different offensive line, a scheme that's probably more suited for the way he wants to play. I wouldn't be surprised if his efficiency bumped up. And I mean, it's not like he's been a bad running back. He's the only back in the league with over 1,000 yards the last 4 years. But obviously, again, that's not on a super high efficiency. And I mean, we've seen he's decent. He can catch the football in the backfield. So so I do think he could improve. I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on how the Steelers' run game looks and if they do draft somebody or how they replace him. If we'll have that sense of regret, but I just think I think you kind of move on knowing that he might have more success elsewhere. But as far as for the fit for the Steelers, and they can find somebody that Arthur Smith picks in that will fit his scheme to bring in, I think they're probably going to be better off in the long run instead of just running it back. But yeah, I mean, I could see Harris going somewhere. I don't know, like the Raiders, or I don't even know, and having a better statistical season and looking like a better running back and looking like that first round talent that the Steelers took him in. I just don't know if the regret's going to be there if the Steelers can draft somebody and all of a sudden that guy looks really dynamic and you have him under contract for 4 years or 5 years if we take it on the first round if you have the fifth-year option. Although I don't know. I mean, Daniel Jeremiah did have Ashton Genty to the Steelers in the first round, although I just don't really know if they're going to roll the dice again on a first-round running back after Harris. But you never know. I mean, if he's there, he's a guy they have to consider.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that they'd go running back first round just because of the depth of this class. I mean, I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth here because I've been a proponent of, well, just because there's a big, deep defensive line group doesn't mean you shouldn't go get one in the first round. But that's because the defensive line position has much more kind of just overall positional value in terms of contract value and how rare those kinds of players are to find versus running backs. Certainly both groups are very deep this year, and that's a big positive for the Steelers. Why would they not take advantage of this kind of group? Joe, are you kind of in the camp of, first of all, do you see running back, I won't ask for a specific round, but like first 2 rounds, 3 rounds, 4 rounds, and are you looking for more of the speedster that can get the edge like Dulac talked about a few weeks ago, kind of what the Steelers were looking for, or are you, more looking for an every down guy, because there's certainly every shape and size of running back in this class?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have Jalen Warren there. You've seen what he can do. He's a tough runner. He can run between the tackles. I would be in favor of getting, kind of that speed guy that can get to the edge. I mean, you look at the rookie running backs who kind of had success. I mean, one guy this past year that fits that bill is Bucky Irving, and he had a ton of success in Tampa Bay as a rookie. It's kind of like a mid-round pick, can catch out of the backfield as well. So kind of somebody in that sort of mold that just a speedster that can that's more so what I'd be looking for. I mean, if there's a guy like Caleb Johnson of Iowa that somehow falls to them, I'd like taking him too. I think he's a stud, but I think you wait. I think I'd be okay taking more of a speed guy. But I mean, it's really going to be whoever they view as the best fit. I mean, Taj Brooks doesn't really fit that mold as a speedster that can get to the edge on the Steelers. Compared him to Le'Veon Bell, so he's a guy that maybe is a later round option. I mean, 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe, but it depends. I'm personally in favor of a speed guy, but I wouldn't be surprised in if they go any direction. Nothing would surprise me with them in this draft as it relates to running back, assuming they don't bring back Harris.
And did you, maybe I missed it, did you give me a round in terms of?
Oh, I did not. I would wait until early day three personally. I would go probably fourth round. I wouldn't be opposed in the third. But I think first two rounds, I think you address defensive line and probably the secondary or wide receiver. It would be my preference, and then third, fourth, you go running back.
I think my first mock draft, I waited till the fourth. I was looking for ways to get some of these other guys earlier, like a Devin Neal, or and the way the board fell, or the way that I kind of see the board falling, the fourth was kind of the sweet spot in terms. I think I ended up taking Damian Martinez from the U, Miami, but there are, I mean, any number of backs. I think Bajal Tutin from Virginia Tech is an interesting choice there. Maybe a Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt from Arizona, or Brashard Smith from SMU, Jarquez Hunter from Auburn. I mean, there's all kinds of guys. Could they get the NFL bloodline thing and look at Trevor Etienne? Maybe. I mean, I wasn't overly impressed with him, but I think he is kind of in that range. So I agree. Probably fourth round is the sweet spot, but I would not be surprised one bit if they took one in the second, or even the third. Although I hope that they walk out of day two with at least one defensive lineman and at least one wide receiver. That is my kind of non-negotiables as we sit here right now. Obviously, free agency can change that calculation, but. All right, we're going to move into the third and final topic, and this one was from Jeremy Fowler, ESPN on SportsCenter on Monday morning. Here's his quote: "New York Jets are a sleeper option here," he said, regarding Justin Fields, that is. "They could have some interest. They like the idea of a dual-threat quarterback. I'm told Fields has looked at that roster and sees some intrigue there, too." So we knew, I think Adam Schefter said on the Super Bowl broadcast a couple weekends ago, that Fields is expected to have a number of teams interested in him. Now we're kind of starting to hear the first team that is, I guess, being linked to him in specific, and that is the Jets. Joe, let me ask you this. If you are Justin Fields, and just looking at, well, I guess you can look at it both ways, but just looking at the roster in terms of the offensive talent that you have to work with, maybe even also the defensive talent, which would you choose? And then, does the fact that it's the Jets and the Steelers change that calculation?
Yeah, I think if you're looking right now purely at what Justin Fields is good at and what the Steelers have and the Jets have, I would be intrigued by the Jets roster right now over the Steelers roster, obviously pre-free agency on offense. I mean, you have Brees Hall, who's a pretty dynamic running back. He had some struggles last year, but he can catch out of the backfield. He's a good option for short throws and dump offs, and can run the ball fine. You have Garrett Wilson. I think their offensive line is developing. I mean, Olu Fashanu is a building block there, but not super intriguing outside of him. But I think the fact that it is the Jets and the Steelers, and if you're Justin Fields, you've worked in so many different offensive systems. You're going to the Jets, who are putting in a brand new system. Aaron Glenn, I mean, it's from the Lions coaching tree. Tanner Engstrand's the offense coordinator. But I think, why would you want to go and learn a whole new system again this offseason? I mean, Fields came in, he had some success. I mean, he wasn't great, but he was fine when he started for the Steelers. He loved working under Tom Arth. He had a ton of praise for him during the season and before the season. You have another year in Arthur Smith's system. So as far as like it being the Jets and the Steelers, I think it matters just for the fact that you keep that stability if you're Fields, and you're not going again. I mean, he worked under a number of offensive coordinators in Chicago. You had no real stability throughout his career. So why would you want to go and throw that away again when you can have a year with some stability with the Steelers and kind of keep building on what you did last season instead of basically going and resetting. So that for me is why I would think I would probably take the Steelers over the Jets if I was Justin Fields. Of course, money's going to play a factor, and learning from Lions coach and an offense coordinator who had a ton of success working with Jared Goff and Detroit could certainly be intriguing, but I just don't know if I'd go and choose a situation where you have to kind of reset and start over again, rather than kind of where you're embedded and you're established now in the system and you can build off what you did from year one into year two.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with anything there. I think it would be short sighted of Fields to jump ship and kind of a gamble. Now, could it pay off with the Jets? Of course it could. I think we're all probably on the same page that the Steelers' trajectory right now isn't amazing. But they do have arguably better defensive talent, though older defensive talent than the Jets. The offensive talent obviously needs to be addressed. There's question marks at running back. There's question marks at wide receiver too. I mean, depending on what you think of Pickens and what they're going to do with him, maybe there's even question marks at wide receiver one. So, yeah, it's maybe a little more clear in terms of the weaponry with the Jets, but just the stability of the franchise and the Steelers and the success that he had. I mean, they made him a 4-2 winning quarterback after he won only 10 games in 3 seasons before that. So that being said, if this is the beginning of a bigger trend in the market in terms of other teams also showing interest, and then you have the Jets throwing money, obviously money could be the deciding factor in this, regardless of what Fields feels is best for his career. It's hard to say no when somebody's waving an additional $3, $4, $5 million per year in your face over maybe what the Steelers are offering. And certainly if you have 4, 5, 6 teams interested, I don't know if it'll get that high, but you could get 3 or 4 teams kind of interested making offers. That could drive the price up, and then could that end up kind of pushing the Steelers back to Russell Wilson? The last thing you want is to get trapped with nobody, because then, I mean, you're just in the worst position. you're stuck with, I guess, Skylar Thompson. I mean, at that point, maybe you do have to take the big risk of like an Aaron Rodgers or like does Kirk Cousins become available and you get him for the Russell Wilson 1.21 million? I mean, none of those are very attractive options to me, but do you think that this interest could end up just pushing the Steelers right back to Wilson?
Um, Potentially. I think the Steelers, if they want to get something done in the fields, I think they should really work hard to get it done before the league year opens. Because yeah, if it does open, and then all of a sudden you have 4 or 5 teams that want to talk to Fields, and then the price gets driven higher and higher, then the Steelers might go if Wilson ends up becoming the cheaper option at that point. I wouldn't be surprised if they just go right back to him instead of getting themselves locked into a bidding war and have uncertainty of what's going to happen, and like you said, leave themselves with nothing at the position at that point. Um, so I do think if Fields is their guy, they have to really work to get it done. This week after the combine really will be the time before free agency that they can try to lock him up. I mean, it would stink to lose him if he was the guy that they really wanted to have, and then they have to fall back. So I think you just have to be aggressive with it if you're Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, the Steelers front office.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're both probably in the same boat in terms of wanting Fields back over Wilson, though. I think what you had a terrible take the other day on, I think that was Saturday, saying you don't understand why anybody would be okay with Wilson being back at this point in time. Uh, can you talk a little bit about that and just why you think? I mean, I think I'm a little more sympathetic to the idea of having Wilson back just because we've seen what it could be at its best. There was a brief time where it looked really good. Now, is that in there? Was that a fluke? Could you just defend, I guess, your terrible take from the other day?
Yeah. So what my thought process there was is that Wilson took over. He started. I mean, he's a guy that struggled a lot in Denver. Teams aren't sure what he's going to do with new personnel. He comes in during the middle of the season, so there's not really any tape of him to look at what he does with the Steelers, and he's having a ton of success beating man coverage, throwing the ball downfield. He's playing pretty smart football for the most part, but then teams adjust. The teams get the tape on him. They see what he's doing. And then second half of the year, teams are playing a lot more zone. They're taking away the deep ball. And Russell Wilson becomes the same quarterback we saw struggle in Denver. He's holding onto the football too long. He's, taking bad sacks. He's, kind of forcing the ball a little bit. He's thinking he's 10 years younger and trying to use his legs a little bit too much to extend plays. And it's just not working. And at this point, he kind of is what he is, and so teams can see that. And I just don't think Russell Wilson has the capacity now to be a different quarterback than the guy he has been and the guy that he was for the Steelers last year. Where he's boomer bust with that deep ball, and if it's working, then the whole offense is clicking and everything's working, and the run game opens up. And if it's not working, then you have just a pretty stagnant offense. And he's 10 years older than Fields, and Fields had a winning record with the Steelers. I think another year on the system, he's going to get better. He's going to work. I mean, it wasn't great last year, and I mean, what Brooke Pryor said, that he played risk-averse football, and that's how the Steelers want him to play. But you can try to find that. What she said was the Steelers think they can find that happy medium for next season, and I just think that's a much better option than rolling it back with Wilson, who doesn't have the same mobility. If you take away the deep ball, he's not really that effective of a passer. And he's just older. And I just don't think there's a lot of room for growth or change at this point. I mean, he is who he is. And I think, fine, if you get into another team, maybe he can have that same spark of success. But when you go 10-7 and lose in the wild card round with Russell Wilson, your starting quarterback, and you have that same record when you have Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph starting, then it's like, what's the point of bringing this guy back when three guys who are all backups around the league gave you the same success or the same record. So I think it's just worth taking a flyer on Fields, or I mean, I don't even know who else they could get that would really excite me. But I just don't think bringing Wilson back makes any really shred of sense given the way things ended last year.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I am leaning Fields ultimately, but I don't think it's the kiss of death that many will probably make it out to be if Wilson comes back. And I think we do need to prepare ourselves for that possibility given the interest in Fields because, I mean, the Steelers aren't on the best trajectory. And as much as you like the atmosphere and the culture and stuff, that isn't always the selling point for these players. Money and just the talent around them might speak a little louder. So, and there was a report from Fowler in that same kind of sentence that says the Giants could be a sleeper team for Russ. So it isn't as if Wilson has zero other interest. I think the Raiders could be in play as well with Pete Carroll, obviously. So this could end up being a trickier situation to navigate than maybe was initially thought for the Steelers with these quarterbacks. They aren't just going to basically have their pick of the litter. There's going to be some negotiating and some balancing other interests around the league kind of working against them here. I think that's all for our topics today, but we are going to move into our listener question. This one from Brett, San Angelo, Texas. Thanks for the question, Brett.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo. My question is, do the Steelers have a quarterback evaluation problem? My take is yes. So you go back 10 years, they held on to the idea of Ben Roethlisberger as a franchise quarterback, even though he was entering his late 30s. Ultimately, his arm injury ended his franchise status. They were not having a replacement. Bypassed on guys like Love and Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts, either because they didn't know they were franchise guys or because they thought they would be fine with Ben. Either one was a mistake. But also, you saw them with Mason Rudolph say they had a first-round grade on him, and I believe them because they drafted Kenny Pickett in the first round, and in my humble opinion, there isn't a bit of difference between those two. Both of them are at best third-round guys. In the same draft, they drafted Pickett and thought he was the best one. You drafted two quarterbacks, including Chris Oladokun, instead of drafting Brock Purdy, who was, of course, the best quarterback and Mr. Irrelevant, so he was available. Had you ultimately drafted Brock Purdy in the third, for example, and drafted a different position, like a Kyer Elam, who was available, I think he was the very next pick, if I remember right, at corner, how much farther ahead would this franchise be? So with the discussion of we need to find a quarterback The real question is, do we trust them to get it right? That's really the question. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, a couple questions within the question here. We will start with addressing how much further would the Steelers be had they drafted somebody like a Brock Purdy in that Kenny Pickett draft in, he said the third round as his example. I do want to, it's tricky to do things like that, I think, because obviously everybody passed on him 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Some of these teams probably passed on him 12 or 13 times before he was picked at Mr. Irrelevant with the final pick of the draft that year. And so, while it obviously, if had the Steelers picked him, would they be in a better situation right now? Probably. That depends how you think of their ability to kind of develop these guys and whether or not you think the system that the Steelers have would be conducive to Brock Purdy's success. He's obviously been in one of the most kind of dynamic offenses with a Christian McCaffrey and with Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and just a whole bunch of weapons. George Kittle, obviously, at his disposal, and Kyle Shanahan calling the plays. That's a large part of it as well. And so I'm not saying Purdy isn't good, but how good would he be on the Steelers? Would he be this? I don't know if people would be talking about him the same way as what I'm trying to get at. Also, you can't really look at a Mr. Irrelevant and say, what if the Steelers had drafted him in third? Obviously, what if the Steelers drafted Tom Brady, and he was a 6th rounder. If you drafted him in the 5th, 4th, 3rd, whatever it was, you'd obviously be in a much better spot. So just kind of putting that aside, do the Steelers have a quarterback evaluation problem in terms of the guys they've selected, or maybe some of the guys they've passed on? He used Jalen Hurts and the Chase Claypool year as a notable example. Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's fair to say the quarterback valuation problem. I mean, Kenny Pickett was a bad pick, no doubt about it, but it was also a pretty terrible quarterback class. I mean, Purdy's the only guy in that quarterback class who's really proven to be anything. And like you said, he's Mr. Irrelevant. Every team passed on him. So then it's on a Steelers specific issue. Also, if you look at it for this year, if you trust them to get it right, it's Omar Khan running the show, not Kevin Colbert. You have the scouting staff has been overhauled a little bit. You have different scouts in there, so it's not the same people. And I mean, when you look at Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, the passing on them, I mean, you have late career Ben Roethlisberger. You're trying to win. You're trying to fill the holes you have to try to win with the personnel you have now. You're not really, which right or wrong, now we can look back and say, yeah, they completely mishandled what they did late in Roethlisberger's career. But I mean, let's be honest, Roethlisberger wasn't really a willing mentor. Like, he didn't really help out Mason Rudolph at all, and they brought him in. So you take a quarterback early, he's not going to be a willing mentor, and you want to try to get the pieces in place to make you a competitive team now. So I mean, again, it's the what if game. Like, yes, they'd be in a better spot if they took a Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, but they took pieces that they thought would put them in a better position to be in a position to win, in 2020, 2022, whenever those 2018, 2020, like those years when they had Roethlisberger. So yeah, I mean, Pickett was a bad pick, but I don't think even Mason Rudolph started games in the league. There's not, I mean, mid-round quarterbacks don't always have success starting in the league. Yeah, I mean, Josh Dobbs is a mid-round pick. He had some success starting in the league. So the guys they've taken haven't been, complete and total slouches. They haven't been, surefire starters. But when you're drafting quarterbacks in the middle rounds, you're not really likely to find a surefire starter. Like, the pick was bad, but I don't think it's fair to say that the Steelers as a whole have a quarterback evaluation problem or even had one.
Yeah, I mean, you had Kevin Colbert making most of those picks you were talking about, Brett, and he had been around since 2000. He had been the GM, I guess, since 2010. Officially was when they gave him the title, I believe, or maybe a little before that. But he had been in charge of the draft since 2000. And I mean, you went from Cordell Stewart to Maddox to Ben pretty quickly, and then Ben for his whole career. So he never really had to juggle the quarterback position, which, maybe that created some bad habits or taking things for granted. Sure, you could make that argument. But it is Khan. It is Weidl. Weidl was around, when the Eagles selected, I believe, Hurts. And so, you have a whole different kind of mechanism or organization in place. making these evaluations. And so I think you start judging this current regime on whatever their next quarterback move is. I'm not convinced that's going to be this year. Maybe they will in the late rounds just to kind of stock the shelves behind their eventual starter, or maybe take a swing on a late round guy with a couple traits. That's fine. But I think you can't really start to judge this current evaluation process until those guys actually make a pick. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you for calling in. As always, if you want to have your question heard, 412-254-3145. Give us a call or text the line. We will answer that question. Just let us know your name and where you're from. And we thank everybody who sends in questions. I am Ross. That's Joe. Reminder, no episode next week. We will be in Indianapolis for the Combine. We will see you in 2 weeks, and we will catch you next time.